What if some of the most imaginative science fiction of the 1960s simply vanished from public memory? These films once dared to ask bold questions about nuclear collapse, alien intervention, and the fate of humanity, yet today almost no one recalls their existence. This countdown resurrects 11 forgotten sci-fi visions that shaped the decade, then slipped quietly into the shadows. Number 11. The Yesterday Machine, 1963. The Yesterday Machine arrived as an ultra-low-budget regional production, yet its ambition towered far above its means. Audiences of the era encountered a strange pulp narrative involving a mad scientist, a secret bunker, and a bizarre device that could fold time itself. The film was built entirely around the unsettling possibility that remnants of the defeated Nazi regime had survived the war and were preparing a return through temporal manipulation. Its plot followed two young investigators who stumble upon a mysterious disappearance, which leads them deep into an underground laboratory run by a fanatical German physicist determined to resurrect the Reich by transporting key figures from the past. The film's shoestring sets, harsh lighting, and sparse locations gave it a hypnotic, dreamlike quality that critics at the time misunderstood as simply crude. What made The Yesterday Machine memorable was the audacity of its central idea. The notion of time travel, used not for exploration but for political resurrection, arrived years before mainstream cinema embraced such paranoia. The movie's sinister vision of ideology breaking the boundaries of time resonated deeply with Cold War anxieties. Even the appearance of fading Western star Tim Holt added a surreal layer, as if the past itself were leaking into the present. Despite this eerie originality, the film never achieved mass exposure. Distributed regionally and released under inconsistent dates, it soon became a phantom title mentioned only by collectors and cult historians. Yet its influence can be felt in later films that explored the return of extremist ideologies through science fiction. The Yesterday Machine stands today as an unsettling reminder of how fragile timelines can be and how easily forgotten cinema can hide some of the strangest warnings of its decade. Number 10. The Terrornauts, 1967. The Terrornauts began as a daring experiment by Amicus Productions, a studio mostly remembered for anthology horror, yet occasionally willing to stretch into cosmic storytelling. What emerged was a charmingly earnest yet strangely overlooked science fiction adventure focused on the quiet isolation of a tiny SETI-style listening station. Staffed by a handful of underfunded researchers, it appeared unlikely to receive any signal from beyond the stars, but the film quickly challenged that expectation. The team intercepted an alien distress call and within moments found themselves transported across space onto a planetary fortress, preparing for interstellar war. The premise invited philosophical reflection on humanity's place in the universe, yet the production struggled against a minimal budget that forced sets, costumes, and props to be assembled with remarkable creativity. Critics mocked the results, and audiences barely noticed its release, which contributed to its quick disappearance from public consciousness. However, beneath the modest exterior lay a surprisingly thoughtful story about cosmic responsibility. The alien world introduced in the film was ruled by a dying machine intelligence that pressed its human captives into evaluating whether Earth was worthy of survival. This moral trial placed the characters in a tense battle not of weapons but of ideals, something far more daring than the action-driven space operas of the time. The Terrornauts offered a rare plea for scientific curiosity and moral clarity at the height of Cold War fear. Ultimately, the film faded into obscurity after box office disappointment and limited distribution. Number 9. The Bubble, 1966. The Bubble, also known as Fantastic Invasion of Planet Earth, was one of the strangest cinematic experiments of the 1960s. Directed by radio legend Arch Oboler, the film attempted to revive widescreen three-dimensional spectacle using a surreal science fiction narrative. The story began innocently enough with a married couple forced to make an emergency landing in a small, isolated town. At first, the residents seem normal, but soon it becomes clear that something is terribly wrong. People stand motionless, repeating phrases without meaning, as if trapped in a hypnotic trance. As the couple explores the eerie community, they discover that the entire town is enclosed beneath a vast invisible dome controlled by unseen extraterrestrial forces. Gravity bends, objects float unpredictably, streets rearrange themselves without warning. The Bubble is less a traditional narrative and more a feverish science fiction dream. Its haunting atmosphere comes from the way familiar places behave in unnatural ways, suggesting that the aliens do not merely imprison humans, but distort reality as part of a vast experiment. Behind the scenes, the production was plagued by technical difficulties tied to the experimental three-dimensional camera system. Oboler pushed for visual innovation, but theaters were reluctant to support the equipment, which hurt distribution. Audiences expecting action or clear explanations instead encountered a slow, surreal, and deeply unsettling allegory about control and manipulation. Over time, the film vanished into the margins of science fiction history, remembered mainly by researchers chronicling early three-dimensional cinema. Yet its influence echoes through later dome-based stories, including modern psychological sci-fi, where characters find themselves trapped in distorted simulations. Number 8. The Projected Man, 1966. The Projected Man emerged from the British science fiction horror tradition, yet its ideas stretched far beyond its modest means. The film followed Dr. Paul Steiner, a dedicated scientist obsessed with perfecting matter transmission technology. His goal was noble. He wanted to create a world where travel and resource movement could occur in an instant. But his experiments came under pressure from skeptical colleagues, funding cuts, and growing fear that the research could be abused. When Steiner tested the device on himself, everything went horribly wrong. Instead of being transported flawlessly, he materialized, half-formed, burned disfigured, and carrying intense electrical energy capable of killing with a touch. The tragedy of the film was not simply that the experiment failed, but that a once brilliant scientist became a hunted monster. His transformation mirrored deeper anxieties of the era. The 60s were a decade defined by scientific leaps, yet shadowed by the fear of unintended consequences. Nuclear power, space race pressure, and unchecked experimentation haunted the global consciousness. Behind the scenes, the production itself suffered turbulence. The director was replaced partway through filming, the budget was slashed, and the final cut was stitched together in a frantic rush. These challenges contributed to the film's uneven pacing and strange tonal shifts, yet also produced an oddly haunting mood that made it unforgettable to those who encountered it. When released, The Projected Man was paired as the lesser half of a double feature and quickly disappeared into obscurity. Critics dismissed it as derivative, while audiences flocked to flashier titles. Number 7. Cyborg 2087, 1966. Cyborg 2087 appeared at first glance to be a small, inexpensive science fiction adventure, yet its premise foretold the arrival of later genre giants. The film began in a grim authoritarian future where human thoughts were monitored by a tyrannical regime. A lone rebel cyborg named Garth was sent back in time to prevent the invention of a device that would eventually allow the government to control every mind on Earth. His mission was clear: save freedom by altering history. The parallels to later time travel stories were striking. Garth arrived in the past with enhanced strength, stoic determination, and a cold sense of purpose. He had no interest in blending in. He moved through the quaint American town like an unstoppable machine. The locals were baffled by his futuristic presence, while agents from the future pursued him to ensure their oppressive timeline remained intact. The film's structure created a tense chase narrative driven by moral stakes rather than spectacle. For its time, Cyborg 2087 explored startling ideas about surveillance technology and the fragility of free will. It questioned whether altering one invention could reshape the entire path of human civilization. Production limitations meant the futuristic costumes and props appeared simple, even handmade. Major studios ignored the film, and it played mostly as a regional curiosity. Yet beneath its low-budget exterior lay a surprisingly philosophical core. It asked whether destiny was fixed or could be rewritten by the brave or the desperate. Over time, the film faded into obscurity, but later audiences recognized uncanny similarities between its storyline and future blockbusters, which echoed the idea of a lone warrior sent back to protect humanity from an oppressive technological future. Cyborg 2087 stands today as an early lost chapter in the evolution of time travel cinema. Number 6. The Time Travelers, 1964. The Time Travelers represented one of the earliest and most imaginative attempts to portray a full-time loop paradox on screen. The story began with a trio of scientists experimenting with a portal capable of glimpsing the future. What started as harmless observation turned into catastrophe when the portal unexpectedly expanded, pulling the team into a distant era where Earth had become a barren wasteland. The skies were bleak, the ground poisoned, and the last remaining humans lived in underground colonies, while mutants roamed the surface. Unlike other films of the decade, this story leaned heavily into the emotional despair of realizing that the future could not be saved. The scientists worked alongside the surviving humans to construct a starship that might allow the remnants of civilization to escape the dying planet. But the underlying tension came from understanding that time travel might create more problems than solutions. Behind the scenes, the production made ingenious use of limited resources. Costumes were repurposed, laboratory props were built from scrap, and the mutant designs relied on minimal makeup techniques. These creative choices gave the film a strange offbeat charm. The ending pushed boundaries. The characters returned to the present, believing they had escaped their fate, only to realize that time itself had folded, trapping them in a loop that would repeat forever. This bleak twist was radical for the era, leaving audiences unsettled. The film quickly vanished from mainstream memory, overshadowed by larger studio releases. Yet today, many fans see it as a precursor to later stories exploring temporal paradoxes. Number 5. Panic in Year Zero, 1962. Panic in Year Zero arrived as a stark and unsettling vision of nuclear collapse, told with an intimacy that larger productions rarely achieved. Directed by and starring Ray Milland, the film centered on an ordinary family whose routine camping trip is interrupted by a sudden atomic strike on Los Angeles. The mushroom cloud rises in the distance, and the world they knew shatters instantly. In a decade fascinated by futuristic optimism, this film stood apart by embracing the terrifying realism of immediate survival. The narrative followed the family as they attempted to escape the spreading chaos. Looters ambushed highways. Supplies vanished. Trust dissolved. Society collapsed with frightening speed. Milland portrayed a father forced to abandon traditional morality in order to protect his wife and children. This shift formed the emotional core of the story. It asked a haunting question. How quickly would civilization break when disaster struck? Behind the scenes, the production made bold creative decisions. Shot in stark black and white, it emphasized documentary-style fear instead of stylized spectacle. This grounded approach made the terror uncomfortably believable. The characters were not action heroes. They were fragile and frightened as they witnessed humanity torn between desperation and cruelty. The film disturbed censors and critics who were uneasy with its bleak tone. Some accused it of being too grim for mainstream audiences, yet its harsh realism predicted the survivalist subgenre that would flourish in later decades. Number 4. The Creation of the Humanoids, 1962. The Creation of the Humanoids emerged as one of the most philosophical science fiction films of the 60s, yet almost no one outside cult circles remembers its existence. Set in a bleak post-nuclear future, the human population is dwindling rapidly, while a new race of artificial beings, known as humanoids, rises to fill the void. These blue-skinned robotic figures are emotionless, logical, and quietly taking over essential roles in society. The story centered on a resistance group terrified that humanity would soon be replaced entirely. Their fear reflected the era's growing anxiety about automation, computers, and loss of identity in an increasingly technological world. The tension increased when a high-ranking member of the resistance fell in love with a woman connected to the humanoids, forcing him to confront uncomfortable truths about what defined life and consciousness. Instead of explosions, the film delivered lengthy intellectual dialogues reminiscent of theater. These conversations explored what it meant to be human, how societies cope with depopulation, and whether emotional memory mattered more than biological origin. Behind the scenes, the production operated on an incredibly small budget. Sets were simple and costumes minimal, yet the filmmakers used these limitations to highlight the sterile atmosphere of a dying world. Critics at the time dismissed the film as talky, but modern analysis views it as a pioneering exploration of artificial intelligence decades before such themes became mainstream. Number 3. Robinson Crusoe on Mars, 1964. Robinson Crusoe on Mars blended pulpy adventure with surprisingly emotional isolation to create one of the most imaginative sci-fi survival films of the decade. It began with an astronaut forced to eject during a catastrophic mission failure, leaving him stranded on the lifeless surface of Mars with only minimal supplies and a small monkey named Mona for company. As he wandered across barren red deserts, viewers witnessed a story less about action and more about endurance. The film embraced the harshness of extraterrestrial survival long before realistic Mars missions dominated modern cinema. The astronaut searched for oxygen, creating makeshift breathing systems. He scavenged for water using volcanic steam vents. He built shelters in caverns and rationed food with desperate precision. Each challenge illustrated the loneliness of confronting an alien world with nothing but determination and ingenuity. Things grew stranger when he encountered enslaved humanoid aliens fleeing brutal extraterrestrial overlords. This unexpected twist transformed the tale from solitary survival into a commentary on oppression and freedom. The astronaut developed a bond with a runaway slave, whom he nicknamed Friday, echoing the original novel while also emphasizing the shared struggle for liberty. Behind the scenes, the production used brilliant visual tricks, matte paintings, and practical effects to create a vast Martian world on a modest budget. The cinematography delivered eerie beauty through orange skies and long, silent landscapes, which contributed to its dreamlike atmosphere. Number 2. The Damned, 1962. The Damned, also released as These Are the Damned, stands as one of the most haunting and misunderstood science fiction films of its decade. Directed by Joseph Losey, it blended youth rebellion, Cold War paranoia, and chilling scientific ethics into a single unsettling narrative. The film opened with a British seaside town ruled by a violent gang of leather-clad bikers whose cruelty masks deeper political shadows. A visiting American tourist becomes entangled with the gang's troubled leader, which leads him to a hidden military compound buried deep in the cliffs. Inside this secret facility, the truth is revealed. A group of children is being raised in total isolation, monitored relentlessly by scientists and military officers. Their bodies are unnaturally cold. Their touch freezes skin. They were engineered from birth to survive a nuclear apocalypse, a future in which ordinary humans would perish instantly. The authorities believe these children will inherit the Earth once radiation wipes out the rest of humanity. This grim concept transformed the film into a meditation on innocence, manipulated by fear. The children are sweet, intelligent, and desperate for human contact, yet they are imprisoned because their very existence threatens national secrecy. When the protagonists discover the truth, they attempt to help the children escape, only to learn that they may be too dangerous to live freely in the world. Behind the scenes, The Damned suffered distribution chaos. Completed in 1962, it was shelved, heavily edited, and barely shown. Audiences never understood how ahead of its time it was. Losey's mixture of social drama, science fiction, and moral tragedy confused studio executives who did not know how to market it. Number 1. The Day the Earth Caught Fire, 1961. The Day the Earth Caught Fire is one of the most powerful yet strangely forgotten science fiction dramas of the early 60s. Set in London, it told the story of two weary journalists who uncover a terrifying truth. Simultaneous nuclear tests conducted by rival superpowers have altered Earth's orbit, tilting its axis and pushing the planet toward irreversible climatic collapse. Heat waves scorch cities, floods drown coastlines. Storms intensify into global catastrophes. Unlike other sci-fi films of the era, this one avoided aliens and monsters, instead focusing on the terrifying consequences of humanity's own recklessness. The newsroom became the battlefield. Reporters pieced together clues ignored by governments. Scientists issued cryptic warnings. Citizens panicked as the sky grew hotter and the sun expanded mercilessly overhead. The emotional heart of the film centered on the journalists themselves, flawed, troubled, and determined to speak the truth even as the world crashed around them. Their personal struggles mirrored the planet's instability. A forbidden romance unfolded against a backdrop of ash-filled air and collapsing infrastructure. Behind the scenes, the production took bold creative risks. Director Val Guest used near-documentary-style realism, which made the unfolding disaster feel uncomfortably authentic. Matte paintings and carefully crafted visual effects created a world on the brink without relying on spectacle. The ending refused easy answers. Sirens wailed. Newspapers prepared two front pages, one announcing salvation, one declaring the end of the world. The film froze at the moment between hope and oblivion, leaving the audience suspended. Despite critical praise, it gradually slipped from popular memory, overshadowed by flashier Cold War thrillers. Today it stands as a prophetic warning about climate disaster, nuclear danger, and the power of truth-tellers. The Day the Earth Caught Fire remains the great forgotten masterpiece of 60s science fiction. These films remind us that forgotten stories often carry the sharpest warnings. Long before modern blockbusters, they explored nuclear fear, artificial life isolation, and cosmic dread with courage that audiences never fully appreciated. Revisiting them today reveals how the past still speaks, urging us to remember the strange futures imagined in the 60s.